at which point did you go from that track of, okay, I'm following the route that everyone follows, to saying, no, I'm just going to like take that what a one-way ticket to India and get into the media space? How did that happen?
So I'll tell you, I'll give you a different answer than I usually give because and this one's filled with more anecdotes. There were three kind of situations or incidents that happened that pushed me closer to that decision. When I was in New York, when I was working in finance, I kind of started to flirt with the idea of the film business as something I could potentially have a career in. At the time, I think it was um, more pure play creatives like, hey, I want to direct and I want to be this great director. And I think one situation that happened was I was invited, or I had some pass to a screening for this movie called Loins of Punjab, which was directed by this guy called Manish Acharya. And Manish, I think, like a lot of people, was, I think he'd done like an engineering degree or some traditional degree, worked in kind of the corporate world, and then said, fuck this shit, I want to do something more meaningful with my life or whatever, and ended up at NYU. And I think this was his thesis film, and I watched it and I said, wow, he's got a bunch of reasonably talented actors, pretty well known actors together, put a film together that's quite nice. It was received very well in India. I think he was at the start of a very promising career. Unfortunately, he passed away uh, in a tragic accident. But I just thought, wow, somebody had the guts to like break away from that mold and do it. And then the idea got like 5% more real in my head. Um, then as I spent a lot of time in New York, I was there right before and during and after the global financial crisis, right? And so I went from working, I don't know, a bazillion hours a day, like, there were months where I was getting like 0 days off. I was just working till like midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. every day, and then starting again at 8 a.m. But then that moved after the crisis. Like, I was thankful to keep my job, but that moved to like getting free at like 7 p.m. and not knowing what to do with yourself. Because you're so institutionalized, right? You're institutionalized to having like this little BlackBerry here that keeps buzzing, and this like no time on your schedule, and like your free time was at 2 a.m. You would go hit the club, whichever club was banging
Open, yeah.
that night till like 4 a.m. or 5 and everything shut. You go back home, sleep for 3 4 hours, back to the office, back at it again. And if you had like an hour or two to kill, you'd go under your desk and sleep, like do a quick 30-minute power nap, or you would say you're going to the toilet and go to the nap room and just kind of hunker down for like half an hour, right? So that was kind of how you caught up with sleep. And to go from that to this like 7 p.m., what do I do? So I started working as a volunteer at a film festival there, which is now called the NYIFF, the New York Indian Film Festival. It used to be called something else before, the Mahindra Indo-American Arts Council Film Festival. And at that festival, there was one short film by these two young guys who were basically also some corporate turned filmmaker guys. They were doing a short film, and it was just for a lark, and it was called Shore in the City, or it was called Shore. The short film was just called Shore, and those two guys are Raj and DK, and they came and they submitted this film. The film won the best short at the festival, and I watched the film and I was blown away. It was a 15-20 minute film, I forget, but the premise was so strong. It was so much fun. I met these guys at the after party, and like, they were not well-known filmmakers. They were happy to hobnob with anybody. So I spent like a good half an hour chatting with them, and I learned that they had these aspirations to go become full-fledged Bollywood movie directors. And I was like, everybody seems to want to do this stuff. It's not uncommon. And of course, they eventually made that film into a feature, which I think Balaji produced. It did reasonably well, and they've had prolific careers ever since. So that was the second incident, and that took me 5% even closer to this idea. And then the third incident was at the same film festival, but a different year, possibly the year after. We were screening Gulal, which Anurag Kashyap had directed, and by this time Anurag Kashyap was already a pretty reasonably well-known name. If you cared about Indian film, you would have heard about him. It was kind of the guy being talked about a lot at that time, and a lot of the other volunteers at the festival were American Indians, so they didn't have as much of an understanding of what was happening in India as I did, and so I positioned myself to be on duty the time of his screening. And when he came in, I got a minute with him, and I said, "Listen, if you've got 5 minutes during the screening, can you step out? I'm manning the ticket desk, but if you can step out, I'd love to chat with you just for 5 minutes." He's like, "I'll give you more than 5 minutes because this is the most boring thing ever to watch your own film again and again. I will step out after the opening credits and I will come back. I know exactly how to time when the closing credits are going to come." So I was like, okay, this is even better. So then I got somebody else to take my spot there. And as soon as he stepped out, I said, let's chat. So he said, no, you take me to a bookstore first, then we'll talk. So then I took him, we were at Union Square. I took him to a bookstore. I think it was like Barnes and Nobles, or there was a Strand or something over there. And we spent an hour and a half talking, and I was just like, it was literally like a kid in a candy store. I was just asking him questions about his career and what he thought of himself as a writer or a director. And it was like, just like an orgasm for me, right? Just when I talk to this guy who I think is one of the most terrific voices to come out of India. And he gave me a patient ear. He gave me some advice. He gave me a lot of, he said, look, just drop everything and come to India. And that's when you'll find, like, you can't build this career sitting over here. You have to like take some hard calls and take those steps. And he said, if you come to India, find a way to reach me and I will give you a job as an AD or whatever. And he even made me buy 2 books, I think, which he was convinced would transform my life. One was Stranger by Camus and one was Crime and Punishment. And he said, read this and I challenge you, you will quit your job and move to India or whatever. I read Stranger. I didn't read Crime and Punishment. I still haven't to this date. But that was the third incident where I felt like people are telling me this is possible. But I think there was always doubt, like, is this reversible? Because it's a meaningful decision, but is it a reversible decision? I was also in a pretty serious relationship with Aditi, who's now my wife. And we were considering kind of getting married at the time. So I was like, I can't get married and also move and also try this like weird career. And at some point, like, शादी में लोग कहेंगे यार दूल्हा करता क्या है like ये मतलब कुछ नहीं करता, नौकरी छोड़ दिया, कुछ नहीं कर रहा है, right? So there was a lot of like uncertainty around it. I think it came down to eventually the Excel sheet we made. We made this little like sheet and we said, okay, how much does it cost to live in India? If you give yourself 2 years to fail, how much do you spend and what percent is that of your savings so far? And fortunately for us, we were in kind of high finance, working Wall Street jobs, getting paid way more than we deserved. And so we had a cushion, we had, a capital cushion. So it then became kind of an easier path to take. It became less emotional and more rational. I think I needed that. I needed it to be like, I need to convince myself this is a rational decision, not an emotional decision, because I don't know if I can take an emotional decision of this kind of magnitude, right? And so it became kind of like that. And also coincidentally, Aditi was kind of toying with the idea of spending a couple of years working in social development. So everything kind of just came together, and we decided we'll do it. And then we're kind of strong-headed and obstinate people. If we decide we'll do something, we do it. I don't think either of our parents were very happy about it. But until the first time, maybe we got quoted in the newspaper or something, they were like, what the hell are you doing with your life? And they saw us in the newspaper, they're like, perfect, keep doing more of this. But yeah, that was kind of the thought process. It wasn't really it was very safe in some sense. It wasn't as brave as it's made out to be. I get asked this a lot, and because we were among the first wave of people to do this back in 2011 or 2010, 2011. Today, a lot of people have done similar things, but we get a lot of credit for it because we were early. But I think it was more sensible than people realize.
Now, I'm taking a few things away from the 3, stories you told, right? Is that one is, it's almost like you can have a dream of being in a space, but unless you are even in the smallest way immersed in it, you are surrounded by people who are in that space. Like, I think that story with Rajan DK is so interesting, right? Is the fact that in hindsight, it would be one of those points where you're saying, okay, this is something which they're doing. This is someone who's already taking that step. And then also asking a lot of questions, because oftentimes in our dreams, we see things very differently from what they really are like. And people are generally worried about asking questions, will I seem stupid? Will I seem like I'm prodding too much? But when you ask for 5 minutes, you got 1.5 hours.
An hour and a half. Maybe more, whatever the length of the film minus opening credit and closing credit.
We also kind of, I feel that as you get older, the weightage on rational gets far higher than the emotional. Because when you're like 18, 19, or actually even like I remember when Rohit and I took that call to quit. Incidentally, same time.
There's too many parallels in our life.
You also went 2008?
2008,
2009?
I moved here in 11, but I took the decision about 10. 9 and 10 is when I took
2007, 8 was financial crisis.
Yeah.
Rohit and I quit in 2009.
Yeah, I quit.
Right after a bunch of people had told us we were getting promoted, go and take up jobs. And our only calculation, which was terrible in hindsight, I think it was more emotional and less rational, because we assumed we had enough money for 3 to 6 months. We had money for a month. In hindsight, we didn't know that you won't get money in advance from clients.
Oh shit!
So we assumed that we'll get a couple of shoots, we'll make money.
Golden rule.
And so we literally, after our first shoot, he and I between us had $1,000. and the check hadn't come in. It was going to come in the next day, and it would take 2-3 days to clear, because those days you still had to go and put that check in, because
Correct.
TV channels would give you a physical check, not
You
transfer
take
it,
that
right?
and deposit it. Yeah.
And so our head of photography took us um, um, for a drink, and we were calculating how much does each pitcher of beer cost. And by the time the second pitcher happened, we knew that we were over what the tax would add on to it, because 500 rupees is what the thing was. And thankfully he paid the bill, so we were fine. But at that time we had done a calculation, say, okay, what does Rohit do, what do I do, what can we bring to the table, how long will we survive, when do we say, okay, this is when we'll go look for jobs. Did you have, and I'm guessing that would be all those things on the sheet, like, come to India, then say, okay, this is how we're going to look at it, this is the amount of time we're giving ourselves.
Yeah, look, there were two decisions to make, right? One was like, what do I think I want to do in this business, right? I think Aditi had more clarity about her journey. It was very clear she wanted to work in kind of the impact space, do some social development work, and it was always intended to be a temporary thing. For me, it was this like dream of, oh, I should be a director, and I'm going to be this like, great storyteller that the country will get transformed by. And the year that I initially wanted to move in 2010, but because we were planning to get married, it didn't make sense to make all the changes at one time. We deferred the move to 2011, and in that time, we just coincidentally happened to move to a building which was adjacent to the New York Film Academy. And the New York Film Academy, as wonderful as it is very easy to get into if you're willing to spend. I learned that, and I went there and I took this filmmaking course, and I didn't learn filmmaking, but what I did learn at the end of it was that I probably wasn't ready to be a director. I did make a very good director, but I learned that I have these like other abilities around kind of project management and understanding story and creative and all of that. And I was like, shit, this throws a spanner in my works, because I've got all these plans now. I've like kicked a fuss saying I'm going to move to India, but maybe I'm not cut out to be a director. So we said, you know what, never mind, we'll just go there and figure it out. Like maybe you will learn to be a producer or learn to just work in a corporate job there. May as well do a corporate job in the film business than in the finance business. So there was no real like calculation. The Excel sheet was actually much more simplistic. The Excel sheet was simply a function of what is the minimum viable lifestyle in Bombay that makes us not really regret, having grown up in the Middle East and lived in the US for having lived there for 10 years, not regret that move. And how much does that cost, and what percent of your total cash? Because there was no other savings, it was just cash. Like you didn't have it's not like we bought a house or we had any other assets. It was just you had cash in the bank. And it was a very manageable number. It was coming to, I don't know, 10 or 15% of our collective savings. And I thought that was a easy risk to take. Like, sure, you wipe out 15% of your savings, but I had done my GMATs. I knew I could get into a business school, and they like these stories, I thought, right? So you just kind of go fail somewhere and tell them, hey, I failed. Would you like to accept me now?
Yeah.
And, hey, HBS, let me show up now. So that was kind of that was the safety net, is I'll go to some business school. I had reasonable scores in my GMAT, so I figured I'd get in somewhere. So I was never too worried. I was never daunted by the idea of coming here and, this not working out. And it didn't work out. Like, for the first several months, Aditi was, financing our lifestyles, and I would spend most of my time watching Big Boss at home, which I was a big fan of that year. That one specific year, I was a huge fan. And eventually I got off my ass and got a job, and it paid enough to cover rent. And that was kind of my stepping stone into that business. And that's when I started to realize, okay, here's what the business looks like. Here's where the opportunities are. And by the end of the 2 years when we were supposed to go back, that's when I started to realize, hey, wait a minute, I need a third year to push this a little bit more and see if something can click here. By the end of the third year, we had enough hope that we could build something. So then we're like, give it one more year, a fourth year. By the end of the fourth year, we actually had money. We had raised some capital. Then I'm like, now I'm pot committed, right? Like I can't step out of this now. So it's been a treadmill ever since.
Like this clip, make sure you watch the full episode.